later on that I wanted to finish up.
So how can we become our better version of ourselves? It's Tuesday, July 12th, and it's about to be 5 o'clock. Hello, good morning. Welcome back to my channel. Today is Monday, August 1st, and we're going to be talking about borderline personality disorder. We are going into another series of personality disorder, and borderline personality will be the topic. Just like the narcissistic personality disorder, we might have to break this down into a few segments. So let's see how much information we're going to be getting into for today, and I'll keep you guys posted. So borderline personality disorder. What is borderline personality disorder? So according to the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Statistic Manual, a personality disorder is broadly defined by the inability to adjust one's behavior, thinking, and or pattern of responses in relation to particular situations or feelings, easily dysregulated. So in other words, it's a pervasive pattern of instability of interpersonal relationships, self-image, and affects, and marked impulsivity, beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts. So similar to the narcissistic personality disorder, it's very complex and it plays out in different types of scenarios and contexts. Many individuals who meet the criteria for borderline can look back at their childhood and adolescence and see the beginning of these symptoms and patterns. But usually psychologists and therapists try to stay away from diagnosing adolescent or children with these types of disorder because, there's a lot of factors that can play into how a child presents due to hormonal development, their social, emotional environments, and their inability to rationalize until they're fully grown adults. Then you can really see, okay, is this a childhood thing, or is it now a character defect and a personality disorder thing? So usually it's undiagnosed early adulthood. A diagnosis of borderline is often inappropriate for children and adolescents, just said it, because they're still growing and developing and learning how to manage and respond to life circumstances. For someone under the age of 18 to be diagnosed with a personality disorder, their symptoms must have been present for at least a year. Okay, so there are 9 criteria that's listed in the DSM-5 related to borderline. An individual needs to meet 5 or more of these to qualify for the diagnosis. You can receive the diagnosis from a mental health professional and learn more about the criteria as you're learning more about this disorder to see if it really pertains to you. To help you gain a clear understanding, we're going to go through some of the symptoms one by one. So the first one is someone has frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. That's a big one for borderline. Frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. Second is a pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships characterized by alternating between extremes of idealization and then devaluation. So it's very black or white for someone with borderline who is with a friend, a boyfriend, or any type of relationship. They always see the person as great, fantastic, wonderful, or if they did one thing to kind of disappoint them in any way or any perceived abandonment, the person is trash, discardable, disposable to them, and they're the worst thing in the world. There's no way to kind of go and think a little bit more logic. Identity disturbance, that's the third one. Markedly and persistently unstable self-image or sense of self. And then The fourth one is impulsivity. Someone with BPD is very impulsive in at least 2 areas that are potentially self-damaging. For example, overspending, promiscuity, substance abuse, reckless driving, binge eating. A lot of impulse behavior to self-soothe, self-regulate. And these are, if you go back to my distress DBT, distress tolerance, emotional regulation video, we talked about the healthy coping versus the maladaptive bad coping skills. So part of the exercise was to write down healthier coping skills and weeding out the bad coping skills, because it's just an effort to try to self-soothe. But trying to self-soothe, you don't want to be causing more problems or damaging yourself any further. You want to start pouring into yourself and better self-care, so you are actually healing better from your trauma when you're feeling the need to self-soothe. The next one is recurrent suicidal behaviors, gestures, threats of suicide, self-mutilating, cutting. This is another criteria if you have any of these symptoms, is also a sign of borderline. Affective instability due to a marked reactivity or mood. For example, intense episodes of dysphoria, irritability, or anxiety, usually lasting a few hours and only rarely more than a few days. So really often experiences of feeling instability with your moods, irritable, anxiety, depression. The next one is chronic feelings of emptiness, numbness. The next one is inappropriate or intense anger or difficulty controlling anger. So frequent displays of temper, constant rage, getting into fights. Those are signs of someone who may have been struggling with this disorder. The next one and the last one is paranoia, ideation, severe dissociative symptoms. So kind of like, feeling like, okay, what if someone's plotting against you, being afraid that others are plotting against you, conspiring against you. And disassociation is mentally separating from physical or emotional experiences, or both. And that's usually when someone is under stress, these symptoms start to arise. But the stress usually comes from their perceived perceptions of reality and seeing things in an all or nothing. So someone who's thinking like that most of the time is going to be under a lot of stress. So the best intervention for working with people with borderline is the DBT skills that I mentioned before, and CBT skills to help challenge their thought process and, looking at the world through a different perspective. Okay, so borderline personality is a spectrum disorder. The intensity or severity of borderline it's because it's it varies from low to very severe depending on the person and their background and genetic makeup and social and emotional environmental factors. So how common is borderline personality disorder? Approximately 18 million people suffer with this disorder, or nearly 6% of adults in the United States have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. Historically, women were diagnosed with borderline personality disorder more often than men, as much as 3 to 1, but nearly an equal amount of both genders. 53% women, 47% men. So it's pretty common, and it's predominantly mostly women, and based on my experience, mostly men are narcissists, but there can be narcissistic in both genders, but predominantly they're saying here in the book, borderline is 53% and women and 47% men. And in my experience and my research from narcissists, mostly men have it versus women. So something to think about. So the root of borderline personality disorder. So it's common for people with BPD to look inward with a sense of self-blame, self-hate, confusion, and conflict. I've had clients who refused to accept that they would even have this diagnosis, or they saw it as a major defect, in which it's not. It's pretty much PTSD, in which I've talked about before in my other videos, in complex PTSD and maladaptive coping skills and just survival techniques that people have developed over the years. And it's really just working on learning those behaviors and developing a better sense of self through going to therapy and unpacking and doing the work, going back to the early traumas. But this definitely depends on a case-by-case basis and how long and how consistent that this person has to be doing the work. And usually a lot of people need to have a big commitment to doing the work. At least I tell people a full year, depending on your severity of your past trauma history. So borderline personality disorder is not a diagnosis, in my opinion, for someone to continue to be fearful of or judging themselves too harshly on, because we're all humans and everything goes back to trauma and early childhood experiences, and having the right supports and the right coping skills and getting the right help from the right provider for yourself can help you to overcome. The brain heals itself, but we need patience and we need time and dedication. So I digressed. So borderline personality is the most researched and treated personality disorder in psychology, yet its causes are neither simple nor certain. There's no single best explanation to why, people develop borderline personality disorder, but it may be helpful to explore the areas such as genetics, psychological and social influences, and brain functioning that have the greatest influence on the development of borderline personality. So going into genetics, research indicates that 37 to 69% of borderline personality diagnoses are related to genetic inheritance. So that's quite of a high percentage. So that's definitely something to also keep in mind. Individuals who have a first-degree relative, a parent, sibling, or child with borderline are 5 times more likely to be diagnosed themselves, and those who don't have such a relative than those who don't have such a relative. The borderline personality disorder symptoms: impulsivity, anxiousness, difficulty controlling mood, and problems with interpersonal relationships. One displays tends to have strong family link. For example, if your mom had a tendency to be impulsive, you might as well. So that makes sense. From what they're saying, genetics can be a big factor, but again, based on my experience and learning, and my own, observation of human behavior, I think that, being born into a certain environment and being raised by people who have their own pathology, yes, you're going to learn that. You're going to start to mimic that. You're going to utilize that as a way of survival in that environment. But say you were born in a more stable environment where people were not exhibiting anxiety and irritability and projection in that environment, you're gonna be more relaxed and calm. You're gonna feel more secure in your attachment. You're gonna thrive, and learn healthy coping skills and self-image, positive self-image, and not living in fear and stress. So naturally, your environment plays a big part in your development versus more so genetic. But it does make a difference, yes, because we are, copies of our parents in genetic format, but it isn't, solely the main factor as to why someone can have a higher chance. In my personal opinion. Let me know if anyone digresses or disagrees. Okay, psychological and social influences together determine your early experiences, how often they occurred, how many you experienced, how severe they were, and what age they happened can all influence the development of BPD. Although many individuals who develop BPD followed a similar pattern or sequence of early experiences, there is no single route to a BPD diagnosis. So it's really complex. But social and psychological influences do play a big part. So let's see how much percentage they said compared to the genetic makeup. So specifically, 36.5 to 67% of people diagnosed with BPD experience sexual abuse, neglect in childhood adversity, caregivers with alcohol and drug abuse issues, chaotic family life, disrupted attachments, having to move a lot, having lots of different caregivers or unreliable caregivers, and adults who modeled poor emotional control have also been linked to the development of BPD. So 36.5% to 67% are because of psychological and social influences, and the genetic, we said it was 37 to 69%. So I think it's about 50-50, if you want to average it out and do the math. So 50% genetic and 50% psychological and social influences. I still beg to differ because most of the time infants are born into their natural biological parent and being raised most of the time, right? So is it really genetic still, or is it still the social and psychological influences? Yes, some kids are adopted. Yes, some kids are raised by relatives and stuff. But usually, most kids are being raised by these bio parents. So anyways, it's a whole nother topic. Kind of digressing today. But comment down below if you guys think genetic versus psychological and social influences are a bigger portion than the other, or is it 50-50? I think 50-50 based on the research, but maybe 60-40. All right, so unreliable caregivers, an unstable home environment. It's important to know that not everyone who has experienced traumatic life events develop borderline, and not everyone with borderline has experienced them. So there we go. It's also worth noting that there's a correlation between the severity of abuse, the age it first began, the number of instances of abuse, and the type of abuse, such as sexual, emotional, physical, or psychological, in the future development of BPD. But when, going back to the beginning, when it says that many individuals who have been diagnosed with BPD experience traumatic life events during childhood, such as abuse or abandonment, but the high percentage, the 36 to 67%, they all experience sexual abuse. So sexual abuse is highly linked to someone with BPD in terms of like the type of trauma and the severity and how long. So all of those combined. How you thought about and reacted to yourself, others, and situations influence how your brain developed and functions today. If one, two, or even all of these early life experiences happen to you, it doesn't mean that you'll absolutely develop BPD, but you're more likely to exhibit similar beliefs, behaviors, and patterns of individuals. So it's a spectrum disorder. It could be on the low end or the high end, just like narcissistic personality disorder. Lower end or the higher end where you're malignant narcissist and sociopath, you know, so it's important to kind of be aware and kind of track your behaviors. And based on the list that I listed before, how many did you check off? How many related to you? If all of them, then you're on the higher end. If it was a lower amount, then you're on the lower end. The third influence that may cause someone with BPD is brain functioning. Research has shown that individuals with BPD have similar brain functioning. For people diagnosed with BPD, areas of the brain that impact their ability to control impulses and aggression, to accurately recognize emotional expressions in others, to calm down after getting excited or angry, or to reason through problems when agitated or angry, tend to show activity. These findings that individuals with BPD have a brain that functions differently from those who do not have BPD hasn't been attributed to just one cause. It's believed that the roots of genetics, psychological and social influences, and early experiences play a part in the development and functioning of your brain and how it and you act and react when you think about, evaluate, and perceive yourself, others, and situations. This connection is a good thing. If situations, experiences, actions, and reactions influence how your brain develops and now operates, then you can change your brain functioning by doing things differently, such as employing new strategies to overcome your borderline. So that's great news, guys. You know, so again, I don't think this diagnosis should be taken as a major defect or a sign that you are permanently defective in any way, because again, the brain heals itself. And the first step is to become aware, gain knowledge and insight, find the right provider for yourself, and start doing the work on yourself with the healthy coping skills and the cognitive behavioral therapy skills of looking things through a gray lens versus a black or white lens. And, you know, doing the trauma work of going back to early childhood experiences and making sense of those experiences. And voila, you know, so I'm happy that, you know, there's good news there, and, you know, it's not a lost cause versus narcissists that we talked about, where because they're not aware or they won't come to acceptance of, hey, I need help, things happen to me, I'm vulnerable, and I need to, you know, look on working on myself. They would never do that. So that's where they become the lost cause. But when someone is ready to take accountability and responsibility and, you know, work on themselves, then, you know, the sky's the limit, right? So roots and influences of your BPD. The roots that influence the development of your BPD are as individual as you are. And having insight into how your BPD may have developed can help you control it and grow beyond it. That's why we're now going to explore your roots using an exercise developed to help you determine what percentage of your BPD symptoms are related to genetics. Okay, guys, so I'm going to wrap up for today. I think we've gone through a lot of information so far. So for next week, I'm going to break it down into 3 segments. For next week, we're going to talk about borderline personality disorder and attachment type, and the different types of borderline types and the different types of attachment types and how they correlate to each other. But hopefully you got something for today, and go back to my distress tolerance video to learn how to come up with some coping skills and stress management skills. And I'm also going to be making a part 2 on that video, as there were more skills and techniques that I wanted to go through. All right, so thank you guys so much for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.